how it's useful if it's not law?
Sure. So the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is not binding international law. It's meant to set a precedent of customary international law, very much like the UN Declaration on Human Rights. Also not a binding international treaty, but meant to set a precedent within states to adhere to these different articles within the declarations in regards to human rights and indigenous rights. The way that tribes can use these tools to make them binding international law is by, first and foremost, adopting them within their own constitutions and setting that precedent within tribal communities to say that we believe in this declaration, we stand behind this declaration, and we as peoples are affirming the articles of this declaration. Once we have constitutional recognition within tribal communities, we're able to document that and take it to the United Nations, and that further affirms the articles in the declaration. But also, we can use it to cite court cases, treaty court cases. When you're in state or federal court, if you cite these articles of the declaration and a court case is upheld in your favor, that is what makes these articles law. By exercising the law, the binding elements of each article sets a precedent. In the future, those cases can then be referred to. This was upheld. This is domestic law. That is the first step in us using the declaration and turning it into law from our own nations.
Well, treaty rights are essentially are some of the things that we as Ojibwe people retained when we ceded some of the lands around here for non-tribal settlement and occupation. The city of Ashland near here, the city of Madison, any city in the United States was once Indian land. So when you think about it, when you think about treaties, the first thing you have to almost do is send your mind back in time. Treaties looked at today in real time would be difficult to kind of comprehend, because obviously the United States is so huge. It's the dominant power in the world. The thought that they would actually concede ground to some little tribe like Bad River doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But if you send your mind back in time to a different day, for the expansion of the United States and lands and everything else that they were looking to kind of get a hold of, through the filter of what could be considered warfare or civility or humanity or what have you, the expansion of the United States was such that the tribes were recognized as a fellow sovereign, and was talked to and engaged on that level. And so as treaties were brought forth, treaties kind of being that means of communication from one nation to another, treaties being the supreme law of the land, as treaties were brought forth for negotiation, our countries talked about the types of things that they would need to be able to live into the future forever. And for our ancestors, some of the language that you see in some of the treaties that are particular to my tribe were the retaining of some of the privileges that came with occupation of the territories that we gave up for mainstream society nowadays. Those privileges of occupation were called usufructuary rights, and they kind of were identified as hunting, fishing, and gathering rights. Our ancestors knew that in order to provide a good life as far out as humanity could see, that hunting, fishing, gathering, the ability to take care of ourselves for the sustenance of human life, were what they were going to put forward. What I find interesting about this all, and I've kind of settled on this as just the way I look at it, is you don't see guarantees in our treaties for clean air and clean water, but you see the privileges of occupation. And I always think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how at a foundational level, air, food, water, are needed for life. And when you think about hunting, fishing, and gathering, they were close. They were close. But when you think about life, and you think about perpetuity and the birth of a nation or the perpetuation of a nation, to negotiate for the diminishment or possible loss of clean air and clean water is to start talking about sickness and death. And our ancestors would have had absolutely no reason to entertain any thoughts like that. For both nations, those types of discussions would have never entered a treaty tent. It's one of the reasons I think you don't really see negotiations for clean air and clean water in the Constitution. You see life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty and the pursuit of happiness are up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs a little ways, because if you're going to be concerned about being happy, you must obviously have air, food, and water to drink. And the fact of the matter is, in the Constitution, the word life is in there. And we can debate that, but the one thing's for certain, we all know without certain things that human beings will die. And so those treaties represent mutual agreements for two nations to move forward into perpetuity. Those treaties represent mutual agreements that set a foundation for being neighborly, that avoided bloodshed and warfare, and that essentially set a template for the preservation of natural resources that are depended on for the sustenance of life of a people. Hunting, fishing, and gathering has the implications that there would be fish to eat. Not fish filled with mercury that will poison babies, but fish that are decent. That there will be places to hunt, and then obviously as an overall foundational tenet that's unspoken and unwritten and completely logical in that sense, that our tribe would always have clean water and clean air. That's going to be a formidable framework when we look at exploiting the headwaters of our tribal home here. And that's the kind of, I guess, legal set of tools that the tribes bring along with those different worldviews that we talked about earlier.
Do you want to just say a little bit about when we're standing at the Bad River?
Yeah.
The head, you want to just talk a little bit about, kind of segue into the headwaters and.
Sure. So yeah, where we're at today is Hoist Bridge. We're in the heart of the res, maybe a little south of communities out there. The dynamics have already changed so much that the things we still take for granted to a certain extent are lost. And so, that humility, that long view, the use of tobacco and prayer and ceremony, our drums and our pipes and all of that stuff as a people, those are the types of things that got us here, and those are the types of things that'll take us into the future. We have a lot of strengths in our community along those lines, and people that have a lot of knowledge on how to utilize that stuff, and they're working to pass it on, but we have a lot more to do. The thing about the mining fight,
the harvest camp is a camp. I like to I've been thinking about it really as sort of as an exercise, and it's an exercise of treaty rights for the tribes that live in ceded territory. And so it's right next to mining company land that's slated for destruction, and it's a way of reminding people that they're here and that they have rights, the tribes, I mean, and that by exercising them, they'll get stronger and they'll stay.
We got trees, good. We got trees. Cool. It's kind of being out there reminds me about my grandma, great-great-grandma, great-great-great-great-great-grandma, Eliza Moore Morrison, who writes in the 1880s about how 15-20 years earlier, when her and her husband John Morrison first got married, how she worked the sugar bush went in on February 28th, met up with her brother and all the kids, and tapped 900 trees in 3 days. The traditional Ojibwe slash way, a cut of 1.5 inches to 2 inches maybe, with some kind of a wigwas or birch bark funnel going down to a basket that could be, you know, take 5 to 10 gallons perhaps. And in that case, she spent about less than 90 days, because she came out of the bush I think on May 2nd and made a sale to East Coast businessmen of 1,000 pounds of what they called high-grade maple sugar, made Indian style out in the woods, granulated it in probably wooden troughs. And it's not an easy process, because not only is the sap collecting labor intensive, cutting the wood and boiling is labor intensive, but the making of sugar takes a lot of arm strength and durability, and you got to have an eye for exactly when that syrup is changing over into cream or taffy or all the other things it'll do, because otherwise it'll end up on your fork in one great big chunk, which is good, but it's not very sellable that way. So we're having, in some way we're having a little bit of fun out here, which we usually have. As long as we're against the mine, we've decided that we're going to try to take a light view of that. We started out with one potential sugar bush at Help Village. Then both the next door neighbors offered to have sugar bushes and have people come help. Then we got land designated over here by the county. So right at the moment we're looking at 4 different sap producing operations, and I got to tell some of the people that's enough. We started out with one operation, now we might have 4 to manage.
Well, we're standing over the Bad River right now. We're on Elmhoist Bridge, and we're in the heart of the res, probably just a little south away from Lake Superior, than the actual middle of the reservation. And from here, we're probably about 11 miles away from the potential mine site. This river here flows south off the southern end of our boundaries up into the Pinocchio Hills and joins Caroline Lake, which is near some of the tailings piles and things that GTAC would have planned for where they would store their waste rock. And of course for us, you know, in that waste rock, we know there will be sulfide minerals and sulfates that kill wild rice, and heavy metals like arsenic and selenium and all this other stuff. So, you know, to put your hand in these waters right here would be no different than putting your hand in waters that are right up at the mining site, and that's a no-go in our book. The fact that you've seen flowing water up by the bulk sampling site cuts to the heart of the issues that we have with the mining company doing the bulk sampling. Regardless of the fact that it's quote-unquote supposed to be frozen, it's not up in those mountains because of the unbelievably rich hydrological features that are there. Those springs just don't quit. Just like artesian water wells in the middle of the polar vortex in Ashland still kept running strong, you know. Under the anti-degradation policy of the Clean Water Act that the EPA holds, there should have been due diligence done to ascertain those realities that you've seen, those natural law realities that you saw and filmed yesterday. That wasn't done. There's no monitoring going on right now to speak of to ascertain what their bulk sampling is currently doing, and there's no framework for any type of monitoring to continue after they've completely vacated area. Those are the types of issues that our people and our technical staff have been raising with the EPA and the state. Unbelievably frustrating. It's as though natural law and the truth of the landscapes up there don't matter. Sit in an office down in Madison and make some parallel universe up and call it good to go.
The fact that I've been sort of poking the tiger with a stick all week, but eventually Melvin convinced me to take him up there with me So as we approached to around 50 yards or so short of the barrier at the actual drill site, I saw a guy in camo fatigues with a military-style rifle slung over his shoulder 50 yards off the trail. I didn't want to freak out the people that were with me, so we just continued up to the barrier, and as we got there, it looked like the military was there. There was 2 more individuals with automatic weapons, one of them silenced, waiting for us near the barrier. And we got there, we tried to be friendly with them. I offered them donuts. They wouldn't return our conversations at all. They just stood there trying to look intimidating and often fingering the triggers on their machine guns. And so we proceeded to keep trying to be friendly. Took a whole lot of pictures, which many of the watchers will have seen because they went national the next day. And we found out later, of course, that that was Bulletproof Security out of Arizona, who wasn't licensed to be in Wisconsin anyway.
So, this idea, so tell me again, what did they look like? What did they say to you? Did they, what was that exchange like?
We kept trying to be friendly. One of the other people there with me, a gentleman named Jim Limbach, and I were taking pictures. Everybody else stayed behind us. We went up close to the barrier, kept trying to engage them in friendly conversation. None of them ever said a word to us whatsoever. The closest thing to communication was as we left, the guy that had stepped out behind us to get us in a crossfire was standing on the side of the trail. So I walked right up very, very close to him, and I said, boy, I hope they supplied you guys with some really good bug dope, because the mosquitoes were super thick that day. And he sort of smiled and gave a little bit of a nod, and that amounted to the only response we got from those guys at all that day. I would say that that day describes the tactics on both sides perfectly. We're a band of merry-making forest people that live off the fruits of the land and a love for it. They're a bunch of profiteers and racketeers supplied by corruption and money. Our tactics and theirs were described perfectly that day. They came to intimidate us with machine guns and violence and threat, and I sent them packing with a smile, a camera, and a bag of donuts.
So tell us what you see when you walk into camp. What's it? What are people?
I see the flags that we put up here before we went before the Iron County Board during their first attempt to evict us.
What happens when you go up here?
I've been up twice so far. I was up here Monday before last with a couple of other individuals, and on that trip, one of the individuals I was with was actually she went up wanting to get a citation for trespassing. So we walked up there, we walked around, we talked to security, we talked to Bill Williams, he told us we weren't supposed to be there, and we basically just waited for the sheriff to arrive. And when the sheriff got there, they asked one of the individuals I was with, they asked us all to remove ourselves from the property, and the individual I was with asked repeatedly for a ticket, and he told her that they didn't feel it was appropriate at that time.
So here we have a truck coming down the hill. I guess it's about the 8th or 9th truck of the day, I guess, by the time I got there. A semi pulling out onto the highway. There's a few sheriffs behind me. And it makes it out onto the highway. And then I pan around and I watch Bill Williams and Gary Glonick introduce each other.
So then I was up here again this past Saturday, guiding a group of students who wanted to come up and see the area. So we hiked up the same way that we're about to go up now. And then after we saw one of the bulk sample sites, we walked along the access road to see another site. And as we were walking along the access road, a black pickup truck came driving towards us the opposite direction. And it was Bill Williams again. And he introduced himself and told us that we were in the forbidden zone and we weren't supposed to be there.
So here we're at the east gate of the the forbidden zone. You can't be within 600 feet of this road on either side for about 4 miles of it now. And so this is where they were bringing the rocks down, and they were dumping them over here, and then transferring it to a different kind of truck and taking it out of here. So this is where they were. The Tyler Forks River is just down at the bottom of this hill here.
You know, I every day when I drive past Moore Park Road, you know, I hold my hand out and I sing a song, an Ojibwe song, which I don't really know a lot of Ojibwe, but when it comes to the way I really feel, there's something a little bit more vulnerable, you know, it's a little softer, and I think that's part of the power.
We alternate between anger, fright, hopelessness, but we always go back to a base of fun and love, and we're also proud of this great big new family that we've formed up here, and we really think that we can win by having fun, educating people, making new friends, being friendly ourselves. If that doesn't succeed, there's always federal court and the sovereign rights of the Anishinaabe. After that, there's many of us that will in fact use our bodies as the last barriers. If it comes to that, we'll lay down in front of bulldozers, we'll stand up in front of guns, we'll do whatever it takes if it comes to that point, because part of the love that we bring to this fight is the fact that we do it for our grandchildren, we do it for their grandchildren.